have 2 match panels. The other one was last night. The one last night was why don't you read it? And we had a lovely time talking about how the Sun Fairy can visit a potential book reading experience and make you know that you don't read, love to read a book. This then is about the books that you actually read. The ones that simply fill you in. And what it is about that reading experience that we live and we ought to perhaps discuss a little bit. Let's start at this end of the gang and we'll briefly introduce each other. And by the way, I believe we are going to miss Marriott today because he's not feeling too well. So everybody send tiny good luck this way. Okay.
I'm Matt Kressel. I'm a short story writer, and my novel, King of Shards, is coming out in October from Resurrection House. I'm the co-host of the Fantastic Fiction and KGB series with Ellen Datlow, and a member of the Altered Fluid Writers Group.
Hi, I'm Stacey Friedberg. I'm an assistant editor at Marriott for Young Readers, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. I work on everything from picture books up through crossover YA, but I've always loved sci-fi, fantasy, and horror, so I'm here.
I'm Sarah Smith. I write mysteries and YA characters. And the latest book, which is the working title of which is the Company Type book, is just finished.
I'm Rachel Steiger-Meister. I'm a fiction writer and I'm a speculative writer for media and academia. Background in creative writing. And I'm working on my contracts. And it's my birthday.
Happy birthday!
Now, here's the worst moment. You say happy birthday, and immediately everybody rushes to, yeah. I think we're in this panel because we've had the experience of finding a book that we simply have to rush into and live. So let's start book. Well, go ahead and book.
Well, I don't have one particular in mind, but I can speak to my current experience. I just started reading Harry Potter this spring. And so then I came out to this world and haven't come out yet. And for me, it touches on a lot of things that I love. Use of nature in fantasy literature, and I read a lot of books focused on witches and metalwax, gaming, and their relationships. So it has he's a singer and releasing. I had trouble reading Immersive until releasing most recently. But that goes back to childhood reading.
A little bit, you can barely hear you guys.
Oh,
A little more.
a little higher? That's good.
How is
that
it?
good? Can you hear us?
Better?
Good, thank you. Is this better?
I would say the most recent fiction book I've read that really drew me in and I wanted to read it to the end nonstop was The Martian, Andy Weir. And I think partly it was the setting, and I think it was also the idea of you know, the challenge against nature essentially, and how we use science to overcome challenges. To me, it's very exciting as a creative person. Okay, we're given a few small instruments and our mind, and we have to figure out how we can solve this problem. I found that book wonderfully immersive, and I'm excited about the film. I'm seeing the trailers.
I'd say that book for me, this is actually a book I talked about a little bit at Boston, so I'm sorry if you saw me speak there, but I still was obsessed with it, which just tells you how good it is. The Glass Sentence by S.E. Grove. It's technically a children's book, but it is so incredibly well done, and the world is just so well thought out, so well sculpted, and it's one of those worlds that it's just so original, and you want to dive in, you never want to leave, you want to explore every nook and cranny, and the world that S.E. Groves created allows for these sort of infinite possibilities, which is not normally something that would necessarily draw me in or not draw me in, but in this case it really works because she can just write endlessly about it, and I would want to read all of the books about it.
I can remember the first novel that I found immersive, and it comes out of my childhood. I was 9 years old, and I was visiting my Aunt Becky, and I was the only child there, so of course I headed straight for the bookshelf. And there was a book called Mr. Smasher's Repose. And I spent the entire afternoon reading Mr. Smasher's Repose. And when we were going back at the end of the afternoon, I would not leave unless I could take the book with me. And I noticed that we've only been talking, most of us have been talking, you've been talking about the cultural, the intellectual world of the book, but we talk about the world of the book. It's almost as though there is a super thing. Mr. Smashman's Repose is essentially about a house. 365 rooms and selling to bits and pieces. And there are gardens around it, in which is Mr. Smashman's Repose, a 18th century family which happens to have living in it some Lilliputians that Gulliver brought back to England. And that was a world. I just wanted to live in that world. I wanted to run through the cellars. I wanted to scull under it. I never wanted to leave. And I think a lot of us feel that way about Pratchett and Harry tended to get dressed up as Harry Potter characters for a reason.
One thing I want to address is I think that what you might find immersive and you might find immersive and everyone here is different. So the thing is, is there anything that we can identify that is common, or what's different about what makes something immersive for an individual, right? I mean, I like sense of wonder things. I like worlds, as you said, where I can feel as if the world is bigger than what's on the page. If I want to explore, this is why on epic fantasies they have maps of the world, because people want to know what's going on in that city, what's going on here. But not everyone likes epic fantasy. Not everyone wants that level of detail. So, is there anything that we can say individually that makes something immersive?
And is this something that's culturally relevant? Because what I would find immersive about a book, someone else might not.
I know for me, I'm going to say the obvious thing. What I generally find immersive is the voice of the book, which I always say is sort of like the personality of a book, if you're going to make an obvious connection. I was actually sitting on a panel earlier about spoilers where someone compared, they were talking about books having personalities and reading is sort of like dating in a way. And for me, the voice is so important. I really enjoy books with strong, distinctive voices and strong, distinctive writing styles. But not every book is going to be a match for you. It is just like dating. You can meet someone who is great and perfect and has all the qualities you want, and you can, for whatever reason, just hate them. And it happens. And it doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make them even a bad person, or in this case, a bad book. There are many books that I can appreciate are technically well done, but just don't do anything for me. And so it's sort of a hard thing to talk about because there's always that sort of unspeakable quality that just some people in some books have that just make you really drawn to them.
Would you say it's an emotional connection with the book?
Yes, it is. It's an emotional connection.
And going along with this, subjective aspect to it, do you think that fiction that discusses or goes into detail of a particular emotion that you might be experiencing or have experienced is something that we, like, in other words, for me, when I read a book, if there's an emotional connection where I can identify this experience with something that I had in my life, and if it's talking, and I think this goes along with sometimes when we're talking about reading fiction of other cultures, that it's sometimes we can identify, okay, that's a very human experience, and we've all had that experience, and sometimes it's a very cultural experience, and you may not have had that. And it's very interesting if the author is still able to make you connect with it in a way, even though you've never experienced that particular situation before. So.
And sometimes it's a way of telling stories. The famous example of Navajo movie making, where another person, this was way back in the 40s, so things have probably changed, but the Navajo filmmaker takes a picture, takes a film of what looks like a field. And the VF Navajo, who is white, looks at it and says, that's a field. And then the Navajo audience really reacts to it, and the other things that are happening in the field, which go completely over the heads of the white audience because they're dealing with different ideas of what's happening in the narrative.
I find actually, just sort of going on with voice and going on with what we both have said, what really actually gets me into a novel is if I can get really deep inside the character's head, whether it's told in first person or third person or whatever, if you can get me so deep inside their head that I start thinking like that character when I am not actually reading the book, then I feel totally immersed and I feel totally connected, and I feel like that can actually help you overcome a lot of those cultural differences, because if you're that close to the character, then you, just through the context of experiencing what they're thinking about and experiencing what they're feeling, you kind of have a sense of how you should be looking at these things, even if you aren't a part of that culture. Of course, that only works if it's done well. But
so understanding the context that the character's in and their background mindset helps you connect with them.
The context, but also I think just being close to them, feeling close to them, and knowing their thoughts and emotions on a deeper level.
I guess what I'm asking as a writer is that when you're talking about knowing their thoughts at a deeper level, are you talking about italics? Here's what I'm thinking, or are you talking like this? Like, yeah, I want. Do you have an example of like maybe a section of the book that you remember that had that did something like this?
Offhand, no, but I feel like, so I don't particularly like italic sections that are just, here's my thought process, here's what I'm thinking right now, but I feel like the way in which the book is written should be filled with that character's emotions and thoughts, and you should be getting it the whole time, and even in the way that things are phrased, that should always be apparent, so that you're never without those thoughts and feelings. The whole book should be written in this way.
Very close third person. First person.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add, I might go take you. Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. Just in terms of more intangibles about emotion, in addition to a character's emotion, just the mood that a story or a world can create in you emotionally as a reader. And I really enjoy the Victorian novelist George MacDonald, his essay, The Fantastic Imagination. And he's basically talking about a good fairy tale or good fantastic literature will be pieces mood engendering and thought-provoking. But what I think is especially wonderful about what he says is that it's going to strike a different thought in every person. And he compares the fairy tale. It's one of my favorite ones I've read when I've been reading critical work about fantasy, is that it's a fairy tale, a sonata, a gathering storm, a limitless night. These things sweep you away, and it's going to sweep every person away differently, and at this emotional level that's below what we can articulate. And then it's kind of a hard intangible to grasp. I was thinking about this panel beforehand. It felt very self-absorbed because I thought, well, what is immersive for me? And I was just reading for the book club tomorrow, Terry Pratchett's Hat Full of Sky. And the young witch, the king, she goes to see grandmother wax, and falling from a student country. And for me, that's evoking, for me, that magic moment, that intangible, that beauty, but who knows what's going to strike you or you, what's going to bring out that wonder, that magic. So yeah, we're trying to talk about what makes it immersive, but then I think there's beautiful intangibles too.
Sarah, so you sent the email to us before.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you were talking about the idea of the lost childhood.
The last childhood, that what they call the domaine de vue, the last, and the last, how it's the last, this is the land of last content. I see it shining away. That thing.
Because I think there's a certain element of, at least the fiction I enjoy, which echoes what you were saying, Rachel, in like, the golden light, the seeds falling. There's this period of wonder in childhood when everything is new, there's a mystery to it, and certain types of short stories are able to evoke the same feeling in me, and particular writers as well do that. And I always wonder, wow, what is it? Because on a sentence level, it's an ordinary sentence, but stacked up in a certain way, they have this effect. And I find it fascinating how some writers are able to achieve that better than others.
Well, Sarah, when you sent the email to us saying, theory talks about reading bringing us to that feeling of our childhood, what it made me think of, and I think it fits into that, is that reading some of these books, like Delineating, it brings me back to the feeling of reading when I was a child, and the feeling of immersion when I was a child, like you're saying, and an example of that happened to me recently, and I think this brings up what could it be. Melinda Lowe, who was at this Readercon, I first read her first light fantasy novel, Ash, which is a Cinderella retelling with two young women that fall in love. And that was hitting certain points for me of bringing back that childhood sense. It was fairy tales, and I love fairy tales. But I hadn't seen a queer fairy tale that would have represented me or who I thought that I was. And so through plot and her depictions of nature, and those fairy tale motifs, she was bringing together some of those elements from my childhood. And I felt that feeling I hadn't felt for a long time.
Isn't it always more powerful when you see yourself transformed in the immersive world? For me, there's a particular magic moment in Harry Potter, which I find to be a nice world generally, an interesting world. There's the moment when Hagrid and Harry Potter are in London in the first book. And they go down the street and Harry Potter is thinking, here it is in London. I happen to live in London for a while. I know exactly where they are. And there's the chip shop and there's the libraries. And it looks pretty ordinary. And then they go into the pit. And the pit is full of strange people. And they go into the alley in the back of the pit, and Hagrid takes his big umbrella and goes like this. And all of a sudden, the world changes. And that's, to me, in the center of what makes a world immersive. It's a familiar world that changes. And the familiarity of having queerness in a fairy story, and the change of making it, of bringing that experience of yours into Cinderella.
Yeah, that makes it familiar and unknown. Becoming exciting.
Yeah, it's like transforming your own experience.
How much would you say mystery plays into this unknown, this idea that we were talking before, this expansive world? How much would you say that plays into this immersion?
I think that would again be an example of subjectivity for a different reader. And it makes me think of a book some of you are probably familiar with, Rhetoric and Fantasy, in which she identifies different types of fantasies by portal quest or immersion. And in her definition of the immersive novel, it's one where the world isn't evident to the reader right away. The main character already is familiar with the world they're moving through. The reader has to kind of just pick up on it as they go. And so that was great for a reader that likes mystery, that likes trying to figure out a book. I think Neil Stevenson, that his book is my partner in his book, and he loves that, and you have to figure it out. Whereas for another reader, they might want that photo class where Harry's learning about Hogwarts, and the reader can learn about Hogwarts with Harry. So I think it probably really depends on, what your life.
Yeah. And yes, talk about the sense of community.
I mean, I know it's something that I think does intrigue most people. Anytime there's sort of an obvious question, I think most people want to read seeking the answer, even if it's not a traditional mystery. If there's something that needs answering, there are unknowns. I think that's always going to draw people in. And I think the specifics of that are more subjective. But I think people generally, when they're reading to fulfill something in themselves, and so they want those answers and they want that information they want to learn. Maybe it's not a traditional mystery, but maybe it's that they want to learn how this world works. They want to learn, do these two characters fall in love? What happens next? Those are all little mysteries.
Yeah, how does the life arc of the character play out? Mm-hmm. Especially when it's kind of my life arc too, as a reader.
And I think when you're talking about my life arc as a reader, that brings in questions of what makes a YA book attractive to YA, what expectations, or I didn't have the exact answer to that question, but you're in publishing.
Yeah, I work for YA. For that, generally speaking, and there's always exceptions, but generally speaking, children's books and YA books, readers of that genre are looking for characters that they can identify with, and we're going through things that reflect the things that they're going through. And I think you could probably say the same of adult books, but children go through very specific transitions and very specific issues. So for instance, when you're an adult, maybe you are going through this, but maybe you're not, discovering your sexuality for the first time. Maybe you're not falling in love for the first time. You're not discovering your own values and your own identity for the first time. And those are really specific to teens, really. And so I know when I read teen novels, I'm always looking for that. I'm always looking to see, well, what would a teenager see in this? How would a teenager find themselves in this book? And you really do want those situations to be specific to teens. Sometimes I'll get a book where the character is 18, so they're technically a teenager, but they're really living an adult life. And it seems like they've really figured themselves out. And to me, it's less exciting. It doesn't really feel very YA.
So it's going back to the identification with the protagonist or characters that immerses you in the course.
Yeah.
Can we get immersed in a story where we don't identify with the protagonist?
I think there's so many different things that can pull you in. The plot can be immersive. It's depending on the plot and depending on your own personal tastes. If you're someone who is really into twisty, turny thriller mysteries, a really well-written one, I think, could absolutely be immersive. Same with The World. The Glass Sentence, which I mentioned earlier, has great characters, but I do not read that one for the characters. The characters are well done, but they're not like the best characters ever. You're reading that one for the world, and you're reading that one for the knowledge of that world.
For me, at least, The Stranger in the Longyear is the same way. There are good characters. That is that world.
So as a writer, my question is, like, when I'm constructing a world that I want to be immersive in a story, are there things that we can do as writers, us who are? I mean, one of the things that I try to do, and I've probably heard this before, is remove filter words. I saw, I heard, I felt. And I found that in my early stories I had a lot of these, right? And then I took them out in later works, and I trained myself to not write that way. And I found that fiction itself can be much more immersive and engrossing for myself and others. And how do you feel about this? Are there particular techniques that authors can do to make their worlds more immersive?
I think that's actually a really great example because I hadn't heard of that technique specifically, but that does bring you instantly so much closer to the character because you're removing those worlds and just makes it even sound like you're more in their head.
Does anyone know what filter words are? Should we explain that? I mean, did I?
Yeah, I think you're going to try.
Okay,
Yeah, I'd never heard that term specifically, but now I'm totally going to use that. That's great. I know for me, you can make me care instantly. That makes a read immediately more immersive, and you can do that through whatever means you want. My favorite example is, actually Harry Potter's a pretty good example. You care about Harry very early on just because of how poorly he's treated. Yeah. He's clearly a good kid and clearly just, you know, is not being treated well, is being raised by this terrible family, doesn't care about him, and so you feel for him really quickly.
Yeah, he got faded socks, and I had him for his
He has to live under like this little cupboard thing, like it's awful. But the example I normally use is actually Katniss Everdeen, The Hunger Games. I don't think The Hunger Games are the best books ever. I like them. But I feel like the author does a really great job of letting you get to know her very quickly and making you care about her very quickly.
Very quickly, and then she volunteers for her sister.
Exactly.
She's got it.
Exactly, when she volunteers, that's sort of, you're instantly like, yeah, I want to follow this character, I feel invested. She's clearly a good person in a terrible situation, and that makes you care.
I was going to say, to build off of that, I think the first chapter of The Hunger Games is really masterful.
So masterful.
Pacing is fast. You wake up with your family, you catch it at night. She's going hunting. She's taking you through, the market. She's bringing you everywhere in her world, introducing you to all the relationships, and then you get that emotional punch at the end, like she's going to sacrifice herself.
Yeah, and it's really I reread that chapter specifically because I agree it's so expertly done. Let's say what you will about The Hunger Games, but that first chapter. And like I've actually gone page by page just to see timing-wise of when she does it. And the volunteering is like page 13 or something. It's early.
And you already care.
And you already care. And you already have a really good sense of the world and the characters and all the important things you need to know.
It's early, but not too early. It's not on page 2.
No.
Yeah.
I have that book on my shelf, and I pull it out when I want an example of how to write compelling fiction, because I studied it, and I was like, what is it? Because I could open every page and just start reading, like I'm immersed, like I'm pulled right in, and I wish I could say, is this that she's doing? I mean, it seemed to me that every sentence was moving forward. Every sentence led you to the next, and led you to the next, and led you to the next. And I was at the World Fantasy several years ago, and Jeffrey Ford told me what he had learned from Lucius Shepard. He said, if you can make a story flow, you can get away with a lot of stuff. Yeah. And The Hunger Games is a great example of a story that just flows with one sentence, the next, the next.
And she makes every single one of her specifics work for her.
Yes.
And she has her narrow specifics.
Those books are a great example of something that gets talked a lot about in writing workshops, which is, in most cases, I'm not going to get into giant statements, but for a story to happen, you need pressure on a character. You need something is wrong, something has to be overcome, or that, it can't just be Katniss's everyday life. And so there's such extreme pressure on Katniss. There's such a need for survival. And then, using that first person, that's intense. Yeah, I think it's just the plot helps that, I think.
One of my favorite examples, written a long time ago, is the beginning of the tale of Cricket, where the guy is in the hospital and he got stung with Cricket venom in his eyes, and he's waiting to find out whether or not he's blind. They're going to take out the bandages. He wakes up early in the morning and he can't hear anything. There's nobody in the corridors. There's an occasional moan from outside. There's a crash in the distance. And he's focused in and his eyes, and whether or not he's going to be able to see, that the pressure of narrative is on this person, and you can't not read.
It also sounds like a great define of expectations too. If you think the scene is going to be about, does he have sight and he can't hear, and that's terrifying.
But he can hear.
Oh, but there's just nothing to hear. Yeah.
There's nothing to hear. There's nobody bustling around in the festival. You think it's about, is he going to be blind? And it's about, sorry, last night the entire world ended. Your problems are much bigger than you thought. The Day of the Griffins. Read the book, don't see the movie. The movie is good. So how about, suppose you're reading books from another culture, another tradition. How do those become immersive? How do you stretch out beyond your comfort zone? And
for me, it's the same kind of buttons that are pushed in a good way that immerses me in like a fantasy world where I'm learning the rules of the world and the culture, which is new. If you read a story that's not about your culture, that is based off of something in the real world, it's the same kind of thing. It's that, again, going back to this idea of mystery, not necessarily the mystery story, but the mystery of learning about this new culture. And I think that oftentimes for me, what I find fascinating is when the character doesn't really pause to explain things. It does something that is different from what I know or I've seen, and I find fascinating, and just seeing them go through their everyday motions. This is perfectly ordinary, but strange to the reader. I find that really engrossing, and I want to learn more about that.
yeah, that's part of your not using filters. And having your reader just dropped in like teabagging hot and ever into the world as it's experienced by the characters.
I think the example I have of that, but unfortunately I don't remember how it worked, was I read 100 Years of Solitude, which you mentioned on the panel for the first time 10 years ago, and when I was done, I felt like I'd been submerged underwater and was coming back up. I mean, that's how deeply I was into the world. And yeah, it is a strange world with ghosts and a different kind of community and place, but yeah, it's often I don't beautifully and magically and kind of get into it.
Yes, you get into it.